They stayed with me, and we worked on this case from 1999. We did not get to federal court until 2003. A jury heard my trial, and I had two women who testified on my behalf. One of them had given up 22 years service with Goodyear, sold her service, took her retirement, and she was at that time a supervisor for Honda in Alabama. But she took a day's vacation and testified on my behalf. One of the lawyers asked her, "Why did you never complain?" And when we got into discovery, we found out that she was making even less than I was. She said, "I was a divorced mother with a handicapped son that I supported paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't afford to ask about my pay because I knew if I did, I would not have a job." That's why she was locked in. The other lady who testified, they would not give her the money, the raise, when they transferred her from being a clerk to being an area manager, which was what the title we upgraded from being a supervisor to area manager and took on more responsibility. But they moved her and started training her, would not give her any pay increase. And she testified for me and was still working. There was an African-American male sitting in the hall waiting to testify. They never used him. There was a union general maintenance man who had worked for me waiting to testify on my behalf. Well, they never used him because they did not need to. Those two women, in my testimony, locked it in for the jury. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, I had been discriminated against me simply because I was born a woman. Nothing else. So the jury came back that Friday afternoon with a verdict of $3.8 million. I had been told to keep a straight face, show no emotion, but I certainly wanted to. But the judge asked the foreman to take a seat, and he said, "I have to explain to you that there's a cap. I was only entitled to $300,000, and then back pay, you can only get 2 years. Our opponents to the Ledbetter bill argued that, and AAUW stood up beside me and helped defend that if this bill, if my law passed, there would be numerous of people using this like a savings plan. Well, I can assure you this is not a savings plan because in some cases there are caps. You're limited to how much you can get. Back pay, you can only get 2 years. And the fact of the matter is, when we're working is when we need our money. We're not projecting or thinking down the road that we may live to be 90 and we'll need that money later and we'll file a suit and get a big reward. It doesn't work like that. In fact, if you read the paper, that's how I knew that it would take me at least 8 years. And it actually took 9 years for me to get my final verdict. But after I left the courtroom on Friday afternoon with a $3.8 million award, Goodyear appealed, and we got all the way to the Supreme Court in 2006. For an individual to do what I have done, you've got to be tough, you've got to have a family that supports you, and you need to have a strong faith because you really find out exactly who your friends are when you go to court and you get your name in the headlines. Although when the original headlines hit, and I do love them, they stated that Jacksonville, Alabama woman awarded $3.8 million, even though I left the court with $360. So that's why I tell you, you can't always believe what you read. But that was a good headline, and it went from coast to coast and north to south. I loved it. But that really wasn't the fact. But then the Supreme Court heard my case in November of 2006, and life goes on. All through these years, I worked my case just like it was a job. I called over 100 people trying to get people to testify for me and to get people that could furnish information. I could never get anyone who would quote the plant manager as saying, "We've got to get rid of the damn woman." No one would say that, even in retirement, because they were afraid of retaliation. That's why paycheck fairness was so important. I can't stress that enough, because if we get that, that gives you a protection against retaliation. in a lot of areas. Because making these decisions it's not easy, and when you step out, you're pretty well out there alone, and you're there for a long time. But during that time that I lobbied and worked for the Ledbetter bill, AAUW was right there with me, and a lot of other people across the nation. But my husband developed cancer, and then 2 weeks prior to going to the Supreme Court, they had removed the left side of his face, grafted skin. And when I got back to Alabama, we were facing 34 radiation and chemo treatments. But I went to the Supreme Court because it was important to hear my case. But when I got there, the United States Equal Employment Commission had been on my side through the 11th Circuit. But when I got to the Supreme Court, the United States attorney got on Goodyear's side. They took Goodyear's side and said, we can't let this case go forward, even though the precedent in previous cases had always been interpreted based on my case. That's why my attorneys stayed with me, and we fought this case all the way, because the law was on my side, or I would have never pursued it that far, because it was right.